Hey all, and welcome back for another video from some dev dude. Today we are going to be continuing on with our SQL injection series, and we're going to look at retrieving data from other database tables. So before you jump in here, I'd really suggest you look at the SQL Union video that I just released before this one. Just gives a quick overview of what a union statement is. So it's an extension of a select statement and what it allows us to do. But we're going to quickly read through the description here that PortSwigger has provided us, and I'll explain that. So in cases where the results of a SQL query are returned within the application's response, an attacker can leverage a SQL injection vulnerability to retrieve data from other tables within the database. This is done using the union keyword, which lets you execute an additional select query and append the results to the original query. So as described in my previous video, it allows us to do two select queries, and then have the second select query data from a different database, different table. So for the example here, we have select name and description from products where category equals gifts. So retrieving two columns of data from the table products, and we're only returning rows where the category equals gifts. But then if there is a SQL union injection, SQL injection vulnerability, and we want to use the union keyword, then we can enter in our quote to escape out of the SQL query input. So in this case will be gifts. Select username and password from users, -- to ignore the rest of the query. So let's jump into one of their labs. I'm going to open up SQL Union attacks. And this just dives in a bit more of the information. The first lab that we're going to do is we're going to determine the number of columns required for a SQL injection or SQL union attack. So the reason we want to do this is we want to make sure that we can match the original query in the number of columns returned. So remembering that the same number of columns that are returned in the first query for the first select statement is the same number of columns that need to be returned by the second query in the union. So here we can specify order by 1, 2, or 3, etc. So order by is just saying what column to order by. So we might sort by alphabetical order on the column about name, or there might be a number column. And this number notation is just specifying what column to search by. We also have another method we can use where we use null values, and we just keep appending a null. In this case, select null. Null value is the lack of a value. So it's not 0, it's basically there is no value here. So again, here just breaking down, all queries combined using a union, intersect, or except operator must have an equal number of expressions in their target list. So the target list being the columns in the select statement. In this case, we're going to jump into this lab, SQL union. So SQL injection union attack, determining the number of columns returned by the query. Over to the tab. While we access the lab, we're going to quickly read the description. This lab contains a SQL injection vulnerability in the product category filter. The results from the query are returned in the application's response. So you can use a union attack to retrieve data from other tables. The first step of such an attack is to determine the number of columns that are being returned by the query. You will then use this technique in subsequent labs to construct the full attack. To solve the lab, determine the number of columns returned by the query by performing a SQL injection union attack that returns an additional row containing null values. Okay, so we're going to use Burp Suite again. It's going to copy the URL, close this one down, and here is my Burp Suite from the last video or last lab. Just going to clear the history. And we're also going to use proxy intercept again. So I'm going to open the browser and paste in the URL. So we know that the vulnerability is in the category filter. So we're going to click on gifts just to get a category query going. And we can see that we've returned a different data set. And now we're going to open up Burp Suite. We're going to look at the HTTP history. And we can see here, this is the query here. So category equals gifts. And then we're just returning a HTML page. So what we are going to do is we are going to send this to repeater, allowing us to modify the query and keep sending it over and again. And we are going to modify the category field. So we're going to put in the first quote to escape the string, the SQL string. So we're going to type in the first quote, and then we're going to put plus union. Then we're going to plus select plus null dash dash. I'm going to send that one. So we've sent that one, and it's come back internal server error. Now let's just see if we add another field here. What happens? Internal server error. And another. That gives us a result set. So from here, the number of nulls signifies how many columns there are. Now let's just render this one out. It's gonna close this one up. You can see that we have passed the query, passed the lab. And because the page loads, we know that there are 3 null columns that we have there to play with. So how does this work? So the expected input is select ID, name, price from products where category equals gifts. Now, I can't be absolutely sure that this is the 3 fields that are being requested in the regular query, but I can make a fairly educated guess. So we have 3 fields or 3 columns that we want to get the information for. So for the input, if we put this in, so the ending quote and then union, select, null, null, and null, that will return us a working page. And that means that the union and the second select has the same number of columns as the first query. And the reason this works is when you select null, it returns nothing, because remember, the null value is the absence of a value. So what it turns this query into is select ID, name, price from products where category, and then we put an R SQL and gifts, union, and then the 3 nulls. And that means that it's a correct and error-free query, and it will work. For example, if we added an extra null or removed the null, it wouldn't work because the first 3 fields that were being returned, so ID, name, and price, there are 3 of them, and then the second query would not have the same number of fields being returned. So again, with unions, the first query and the second query, and however many other queries you have, must have the same number of fields being returned. Well, that's it for this video, guys. I know it's a bit of a jump learning about unions if you're coming from nothing at all. I hope this kind of clarifies things for you. If you have any issues, again, check out the previous video I have on SQL unions. I will link that in the top right now. And also, PortSwigger are, again, great at providing good content on their introduction pages. Thank you for tuning in again, and I hope to see you in the next video.